for the people with whom we shared Odyssey, and that's Bud and Jane Eisen. Who are you? Stand up, guys. It was a plot that we hatched in 1972 because Bob and I had a small 27-foot sailboat, and Bud and Jane and Bob and I had wonderful weekends out sailing to the nearby islands from Athens. But there were all those gorgeous islands on the other side of the Aegean that we never got to see. So when Bud and Jane had to leave in the summer of 1972, the men came up with this plot to buy a sailboat, and 20 years later, when we returned, when we were all retired, we'd come back and cover all the islands, see as much of the Aegean as we liked. Well, it sounded pretty far-fetched to me. But anyway, it eventually happened. And so 20 years later, we were launched in our project, and that's really the story of this book. I became the log keeper for a couple of reasons, because I had an academic assignment, and I had been working at Georgetown for 5 years, and had taken wonderful classes in their liberal studies program. But I had to complete a thesis in order to complete my degree. And my classics professor concocted the wonderful scheme that as a contemporary sailor going to the Med, I could compare my experiences with those that Homer describes in the Odyssey. We could find out if the sea really is wine dark, and if those rosy fingers really do come up at dawn. And we went through the past Scylla and Charybdis, the threatening monster and the big whirlpool. And so all of those things were part of my assignment. And so, but I began to find that writing the log was fun. When you were facing danger, when things were going rough, you could sit down and pour your heart out to your log. When you might have a tiff with somebody else on the crew, all of those things got poured into that book. And so I got home, and I wrote my thesis, and I threw these 5 or 6 or 7 logs books into a basket and said, someday I'll do something with them. But one of the questions that we always got whenever we stopped to tell somebody about our experiences was, they'd look at the 4 of us and say, you guys still friends? So I wanted to tell more in depth also the story of our relationships, because that was part of what made up the drama of the story. We had our ins and outs, and I asked myself often how it was that we managed to keep on, and I think it was partly because of the difference in our personalities more than the similarity. I would say Bud was the catalyst. He was always driving for a new project, ready to do another job, and always, thinking ahead. Bob was the analyst, and he could sit and think and dream and decide at the very last minute that he suddenly needed to unpack and repack the whole lazarette hatch on the deck before we could leave, because suddenly that had become a high priority for him. If I were being kind to myself, I would say I was the realist who looked at things and said, too expensive, we can't get that big sail, no, no, no. Or if I were being more truthful, I probably could call myself the pessimist. Then Jane was the pacifist. She could soothe feelings. If things were rough, you could always rely on Jane to be the peacekeeper, the one who did the go-betweens. So anyway, I think it was the fact that we were very different. The men did not form a coalition against the women. Mostly the women didn't form a coalition against the men, although once in a while we have our moments. So anyway, that's kind of the personalities of the story. And so, after a while, I began to realize that our memories were fading, and we had different opinions. And I didn't want this story to be lost to our family's collective memory. So I began to think, gotta write this story, but how? Well, Joanne solved my problem, bit by bit, year after year. She gave me ideas. Finally, I decided, rather than telling it was as if we went here and we went there, I would string together a series of stories, like a sailor who's coming to port and wants to tell the dramatic things that happened. Maybe it was the dangerous thing, or the funny thing, or the thing that was beautiful. So it was kind of a trying to spin these vignettes together and pull by doing it chronologically, telling the story or trip. So that's basically what the story is in the book. And I hope you'll find you can pick it up and read a chapter anywhere, and it's fairly complete in itself. And now my hopes for the book are only this. My Twido family, my father's family, came from Norway in the early 1800s. And there were a few people in the family that began writing little stories about it. And they mimeographed them and passed them around to maybe 10 people in the family. And they passed around and we copied and recopied them. And I realized how much it has meant to me, to get a glimpse of the life that they lived, how different it was. One of the pictures I treasure is the one where one granddaughter is talking about my great-great-grandmother Aslag, who was a hard woman, and she was very financially, astute. But she had cleaned a fish, and her finger had gotten infected, and so they had to cut it off. So she was a three-fingered woman, but she loved to knit, and every year she would knit mittens for all of her grandchildren. This was what one of her granddaughters told in this story. And she said every grandchild would be sitting around in a circle, watching Grandma Aslak knit with her missing finger and marveling at her accomplishment. So little things like that you can draw from those first-hand accounts. Just give you a picture of somebody of a different era. So my hope is that someday a great-great-grandchild of Bud and Jane or Bob and me will pick up this book from a shelf and say, so this is what they lived like back in the United States. And that maybe that will give this child the impetus to put down something of what they're experiencing at the moment to leave for future generations. And I'm sure will be interesting beyond anything we can imagine. So thank you all so much for being here.